Sometime in the last decade, the conversation around extraterrestrial life stopped being fringe. The governments deny. That is, the established dynamic. But what has been happening is the opposite. The institutions are leading the narrative, and the public is being invited to believe.
If you saw this in the skies over South Florida, would you call me and say, hey, Rob, get a news camera over here. There's something weird going on. Well, these formations appeared last night in the sky over downtown Phoenix, as you see there. The Federal Aviation Administration said there's a simple answer to the mystery. The military flares.
What we do see, and we actually show what I believe is the most startling UFO footage ever shot, and this is courtesy Dr. Roger Lear, who was in Kumburgaz, Turkey, several years ago.
What follows is an attempt to map the architecture of what may be the largest coordinated psychological operation in modern history. There are two possibilities here. Aliens do not exist, which is unsettling, or aliens exist, which is also unsettling. Consider what an actual confirmation would do. If contact were verified tomorrow, the number of people who would abandon every framework they have would be staggering. Religious systems and geopolitical assumptions, all of it would have to be rebuilt in real time.
On the left, red flames seem to indicate a landing site for an unfamiliar craft.
Every serious investigation begins by identifying the wrong question. The public debate around alien life has centered on one question: do they exist? But the more useful question is a little bit different. Not if aliens exist, but why in the last 10 years the most powerful forces and governments on Earth decided the answer mattered enough to say so publicly. Let's see some examples of what I'm talking about.
Welcome to Beyond Human, the last call.
In 2017, the US Department of Defense acknowledged the existence of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, a classified $22 million initiative that had been running since 2007 and that no sitting member of Congress had publicly confirmed. In 2020, the Pentagon formally released 3 videos of unidentified aerial phenomena and stated that they had never been authorized for public release. In 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence published a preliminary assessment on UFOs, identifying 144 incidents reported by the US government personnel. Of those 144, the report provided an explanation for exactly one case. In 2023, a former intelligence officer named David Grush testified before Congress and stated that the United States government was in possession of non-human craft and biological material managed by a network of private contractors operating outside congressional oversight. In March 2024, the Pentagon All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office published a historical review of UFO programs and concluded it had found no verifiable evidence of any of what Grush had described. So the same government that granted Grush a security clearance allowed him to file official reports through intelligence channels and permitted him to testify before Congress, then published a report later stating that the programs he described do not exist. No institution operates that way by accident. That sequence looks a lot like evidence of a deliberate information architecture, one in which contradictory official positions are released in sequence, generating a sustained public argument that cannot be resolved because the institutions with access to the relevant material are the same ones releasing contradictory accounts of it. Let's go back in time and see what I'm really talking about. The CIA has publicly acknowledged that it used unidentified flying object reports as operational cover for classified aviation programs during the Cold War, when civilian pilots and military personnel reported unusual aerial phenomena in the 1950s. The CIA assessed that roughly half of those reports corresponded to sightings of classified reconnaissance aircraft. Rather than clarify the sightings and expose the programs, the agency allowed the UFO explanation to be spread. Maybe because a population arguing about aliens is not investigated classified aircraft. As said before, David Grush sat before the House Oversight Committee and testified under oath that the United States government was in possession of non-human aircraft. He said he had filed official reports through designated intelligence channels, and those reports have been verified as credible by Intelligence Community Inspector General. His hearing was broadcasted live on television. But as said before, sensitive information is not discussed in an open session. Witnesses with access to classified programs do not testify in public.
I'm asking Congress to hold our government to this standard and thoroughly investigate these claims.
The format of that hearing was therefore a deliberate institutional choice. Someone authorized it. When committee members asked Grush for specific details, he stated repeatedly that he could not discuss them in an open session. The information that would allow independent verification was, by design, not present in that room, and 8 months later, the Pentagon published a report saying none of it could be confirmed. The structure of this sequence is not consistent with either a genuine whistleblowing event or a genuine institutional denial. It is consistent with a third function, the deliberate introduction of an unresolvable claim into public discourse. An unresolvable claim is way more durable than a confirmed fact or lie. A confirmed fact can be accepted and processed. A confirmed lie can be exposed and dismissed. A claim that is credible enough to be taken seriously, official enough to carry institutional weight, and specific enough to generate sustained public argument, but is structured in a way that prevents verification, operates differently. It occupies attention indefinitely, divides the population along lines that had nothing to do with the actual subject, and establishes the institutions managing the disclosure as the only legitimate source of future information on this specific topic. Let's see some more examples of that. In 1953, a CIA advisory panel convened to assess the national security implications of the UFO phenomenon. Its conclusion had nothing to do with extraterrestrial life. The panel determined that unidentified aerial phenomena carry, quote, strategic utility independent of any real phenomena. The concern was that the public conversation around them was a vulnerability. Mass misidentification, panic, and the clogging of military communication channels were all risks. On July 24th of that year, civilian pilot Kenneth Arnold reported 9 disc-shaped objects flying near Mount Rainier. Within 2 weeks, hundreds of similar reports had been filed across the country. The military nation response was skepticism. That changed when witnesses with formal institutional credibility, including state-level government officials, began filing reports. Lieutenant General Nathan Twining announced official investigations and invited the public to report further sightings. On July 8, 1947, the United States Army issued a press release stating it had recovered a flying disc from a ranch near Roswell in New Mexico. The following day, the same institution retracted its statement and identified the object as a weather balloon. The correction received a fraction of the original coverage, and the sequence embedded itself in the public memory as something like, the military said that they found something, and then they say they don't. This is not a failure of communication. Maybe that is a feature of how corrections function in mass media. The first version propagates faster and farther than a second. Any institution with media experience understands this. Then why did they do that? 3 months later, General Twining issued a classified memorandum stating that the aerial phenomenon was, in his assessment, real and not visionary or fictional. That document led directly to the creation of Project Sign in 1948. The public position was a weather balloon. The classified position was something real. And both of them came from the same office in the same year. And neither of the answers was accessible to the population being asked to form an opinion. The CIA later confirmed that it had used UFO reports as operational cover for classified aviation programs throughout the 1950s and the 1960s. Roughly half of the civilian UFO sightings during that period corresponded to classified aircraft. including the U-2 and early SR-71 prototypes. The agency assessed that allowing the extraterrestrial explanation to persist was preferable to acknowledging the programs, and the confusion was maintained as a deliberate operational choice. The official explanation for Roswell arrived in the 90s. The debris, according to the government reports, came from the project mogul, Jesse Marceau, the officer who had originally handled the debris and whose 1947 statement has been used to support the weather balloon explanation, had by then reversed his account and stated publicly that what he recovered was not any conventional object. His reversal came decades later after the original event, when independent verification of his claim was no longer possible. So, can you see the pattern right here? Official positions that contradict each other across time, classified documentation that supports neither the public position nor the alternative being promoted publicly, and witnesses whose accounts shift in ways that cannot be independently verified. The 2024 AARO report described the current body of claims about alien technology, especially in US government possession. In their words, it says it's largely the result of circular reporting produced by a group of individuals who believed it to be true, without evidence to substantiate the claim. Sean Kirkpatrick, the former director of AARO, stated publicly that he was troubled by the spread of what he called pseudoscientific thinking among the government officials responsible for the national security decisions. Luis Elizondo disputes that. He states that he cannot discuss the evidence because it remains classified. Both men are describing the same institutional record. Neither has the underlying documentation available for independent review. Elizondo cannot release what he knows because it is classified. AARO cannot release what it revealed because it's classified, and the population only has access to the argument between them, nothing else. In 1980, Paul Benowitz filed a formal report with the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigation. Benowitz was a military contractor. His company manufactured scientific instruments. He lived adjacent to the Kirtland Air Force Base, a facility whose neighbors including Los Alamos National Laboratory, the Trinity nuclear test sites, and the White Sands Missile Range. He had been observing lights and recording electromagnetic emissions above this base, and believed he had documented evidence of alien activity. He brought that evidence to the Air Force himself. The Air Force reviewed his materials and assigned an agent to respond. His name was Richard Doty. His function was to produce false realities in the minds of specific targets using carefully constructed misinformation. What Benowitz had actually recorded was a classified NSA program which was operating without public acknowledgement. Richard Doty's task was to ensure that Benowitz never arrived at the correct conclusion. He began supplying Benowitz with information designed to validate and expand the belief he had already formed. He handed him falsified documents describing alien presence and ongoing non-human operations. All of that was fed to Benowitz through an intermediary, a guy named William Moore, a UFO researcher and co-author of a commercially published book on the Roswell incident. Moore had been recruited by Doty and given access to fabricated classified material on the condition that he delivered it to Benowitz and report on his reactions. Benowitz deepened his investigation into the extraterrestrial explanation, which meant he stopped investigating the classified program. Doty's objective was achieved, and Benowitz was eventually institutionalized. That operation did not remain contained to only Paul Benowitz. Moore continued producing UFO materials for years after the campaign. The fabricated documents Doty created for the Benowitz operation entered the broader UFO research community. Doty retired from the Air Force office. Then after that, he became a public whistleblower. He began making claims about secret government films of crashed extraterrestrial craft, and his case is not unique in institutional record. In 2023, an investigation ordered by the US Congress and conducted by the Department of Defense, found that the Pentagon had actively promoted UFO narratives since at least the 1980s. A retired Air Force colonel interviewed during that investigation confirmed that he had publicly participated in a documented misinformation operation near Area 51. He planted fabricated photographs of anomalous aerial objects at a local bar near the base. The photos were designed to explain what locals were observing: unusual aircraft with unconventional appearances and flight profiles. Those objects were the first American stealth fighters, including the F-117. That alien explanation was introduced because it was more immediately compelling than the accurate one and carried no classified risk to the US government. Both cases share a same logic. The institution chose those explanations because the population was already inclined to find it plausible, which meant it required a minimal support to sustain it, and because it directed investigation away from the actual program. A population pursuing alien explanation is not interviewing engineers, and both operations worked. Benowitz was institutionalized. The F-117 flew for years before public acknowledgement. The fabricated documents from the Benowitz operation are still cited. Even in 2026, there are people who believe that they are genuine. On September 21, 1987, President Ronald Reagan addressed the 42nd United Nations General Assembly. The speech was primarily about nuclear arms control. Near its end, he inserted a speech without precedent in the diplomatic record. He said, "How quickly our differences around the world will vanish if we're faced with an alien threat from outside this world. And yet I ask, is there not an alien force already among us?" The documented records of Reagan's public remarks show he returned to this specific scenario at least 5 times during his presidency. Each iteration carried the same structural premise: an external, non-human threat will dissolve the political divisions that conventional diplomacy could not resolve. Mikhail Gorbachev later confirmed that Reagan had made a version of that same argument in a private conversation during the 1985 Geneva summit. Reagan had said, according to Gorbachev's account, that the United States and the Soviet Union would unite immediately if the planet faced an extraterrestrial attack. This alien threat that Reagan articulated publicly in 1987 appears in a more explicit form in an account from a decade earlier. Carol Rosen was an executive at Fairchild Industries and a direct professional advisor to Wernher von Braun during the final years of his life. Von Braun had led 1940s Germany's V-2 ballistic missile program and later the American civilian space program. He died of cancer in 1977, but in May 2001, Carol Rosen testified at the National Press Club in Washington about conversations she stated she had with von Braun during that period. According to her, Wernher von Braun described a sequence of manufactured or amplified threats that would be used by groups within the American government to justify the militarization of space. The Soviet Union would come first, then terrorists, rogue nations, asteroids, then, as the final card, an alien threat. Von Braun called it the last card. The Soviet Union defined American military and intelligence spending throughout the 1980s. The terrorist threat became the central organizing principle of American security policy after September 11, which produced prolonged military operations and domestic surveillance programs of unprecedented scale. Rogue nations, including Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, Libya, and North Korea, were used to justify sustained military interventions across various administrations. The Obama administration released its first formal national security assessment of the asteroid threat in 2013. Institutional investment in unidentified aerial phenomena has been expanding continuously since 2017, with congressional hearings, Pentagon programs, and declassified acknowledgments that have no equivalent in any prior decade. Whether if this sequence confirms Rosen's account or simply describes the predictable evolution of American threat assessment priorities is a question the available record cannot resolve yet. The operational model that allows large-scale programs to function within this structure without requiring comprehensive knowledge by individual participants is compartmentalization. The Manhattan Project employed over 130,000 people, and most of them did not know what they were building. Operation Paperclip, which transferred von Braun and hundreds of German scientists into American defense programs under institutional cover, maintained for decades before the documents were declassified. The CIA's MKUltra program was divided into 150 separate sub-projects administered by 80 institutions, with most participants having no knowledge of the program's full scope. Area 51 maintained active classified programs across multiple decades in which contracted personnel routinely had no knowledge of what was operating in the facilities. Compartmentalization does not require universal complicity. It only requires that each participant know exactly what is their function. Bill Cooper, a former U.S. Navy serviceman who claimed he had access to classified intelligence material during his active service, arrived in the same argument from a different direction. Beginning in 1988, he made public claims about what he stated were documents he had reviewed during his naval career. In 1991, he published those claims in a book titled Behold a Pale Horse. He began by claiming that extraterrestrials existed and the government was suppressing the evidence. He then reversed that position entirely. In his later analysis, no extraterrestrial presence existed. Instead, he concluded there was a constructed operation designed to prepare a global population for a simulated alien invasion, which would then be used to justify the elimination of national governments and establish a unified one world authority. We cannot verify his claims or either have a talk with him. He was killed in a confrontation with sheriff's deputies at his home in Arizona in November 2001. None of them provided independently verifiable documentation that such a program existed as a formal ongoing operation, but one person claimed to have that. In 1994, a Canadian journalist named Serge Monast published a text titled NASA's Project Blue Beam, a 4-stage plan attributed to NASA and the United Nations to dismantle traditional religions and national identities and replace them with a single global religion and a unified world government. The first stage involved engineered seismic events at specific global locations, calibrated to surface pre-planted archaeological artifacts. Those artifacts would be presented publicly as evidence the established religions were built on falsified or misread historical records, introducing systemic doubt before the alternative to that was introduced. The second stage was a global holographic projection. Satellites in orbit would project three-dimensional images across vast sections of the sky simultaneously, representing the central figures of all major religions, appearing in different regions at the same time and speaking local languages. That sequence will culminate in the fusion of all figures into a single identity, presenting itself as the convergence point in every tradition. The third stage, as Monast described it, involved electronic communication delivered as internally generated rather than external transmission. Low-frequency radio waves from satellites, individualized by recipient, perceived as cognition rather than a signal. Research into the use of electromagnetic waves to influence the human nervous system existed within American classified programs from at least the 1950s. MKUltra Sub-Project 119, confirming documents declassified in 1977, documented experiments in this specific area conducted under CIA supervision. The fourth stage operated across 3 simultaneous tracks: a simulator alien invasion visible at scale, targeted messaging to specific religious populations structured to be interpreted as doctrinal fulfillment, and the activation of electronic devices through transmission via cable. in fiber optic networks. The final outcome of those 4 stages would be a choice presented to the population in the chaos produced by the preceding phases: accept the new unified order and survive within a global totalitarian system, or refuse and face forced labor or execution.